broken, lost, and forgotten, which comes from her own life story of hope and redemption. As a survivor of sex trafficking, she has a deep belief in a restorative healing power of faith and community. She uses her story to inspire others to action and to spread hope to those who feel hopeless. Ashley is a mom, aspiring author, and entrepreneur. She previously served as the assistant director of Be Generous Incorporated, a nonprofit organization in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, established to help women overcome life-dominating circumstances such as addiction and human trafficking. She holds a bachelor's degree from Auburn University in communication and business and is a licensed real estate agent in Florida, serving clients along the beautiful Emerald Coast. She lives in Niceville, Florida with her teenage son, and can usually be found cheering on the sidelines of whatever field he's playing. Please help me welcome Ashley.
It is really an honor to be here, to be asked by Terry and the women Realtors of Pensacola. So thank you so much for having me today. And also just kind of bringing, it feels really like a full circle moment. I have known some of these women for a couple of years now. And it's really interesting because on my way over here, as I was kind of just finishing up thinking about the direction that I was going to go with the story, because honestly, there are so many things that I could say, we could talk about, but I really like to have a little bit of a landing place. And really the word that I kept hearing on the way here had a lot to do with community. And so as you're listening to my story and how I've heard them and how all of it really tied in together is community. And one of my favorite things that you said, Joan, when we were talking was, a lot of times we hear this word human trafficking, and it really is a big word. And even myself, when I first heard about human trafficking, and it's interesting, it was also from Christine Kane about 12 years ago. It just felt so huge, right? Like, what do I do? This is this big, far off word. This is this big thing. What can I do? And what can just your everyday person do? Your everyday mom, parent, child, I mean, whatever. What can you do? But I love the statement that Joan actually wasn't doing. I'm sorry. It was a sheriff. I was so impressed. I wish he was here so I could tell him thank you for being here. But he made a statement about them adding questions to their interview process. And that interview process, he just said, hey, we added five questions, and it may seem small, but we just at least started something. And I think that that's the thing, like, you just find something, you find one thing small, you test it, see if it works, and if it works, you just do it well, and then you add another thing. Kind of like real estate. But it's just like, I love that. And I loved having the sheriff open us up because sometimes it has, in my story, along the way my story goes, I would say that I did not really like law enforcement for some time in my life. And so it brings me so much hope when I meet law enforcement that just share compassion for this particular subject. And just you really sense their compassion for their community. So it really, I loved hearing him, so y'all tell me. Okay, so I think it's important to know that I grew up in a normal family. My dad was an officer in the United States military. My parents are both from Montgomery, Alabama. And my life really, I grew up moving around all the time. My parents were high school sweethearts. When my dad graduated, also from Auburn University, my dad went into the military immediately, and they started moving, and I came along shortly after. In that process, I had what would be considered a really normal childhood. I had great parents. I come from a two-family home, but around 11 or 12, there was a little bit of a shift. My home life shifted just a little bit. We moved to a new city because we did move every 2 years. We moved to a new city, and both of my parents were individually doing their best, but both kind of going through stuff. So my dad, my grandmother at the time was diagnosed with leukemia, and my mom had early onset of an autoimmune disease. And so it was, I'm just emotional about that, but anyway, so, parents, we were just doing our best. And so my parents are doing their best getting through life. And for me as a child, for whatever reason, I was just hearing some lies based on in my house, whether it had been my parents intentionally did or did not do. which kind of led me, while I'm learning to establish relationships in a new city, I became in a desperate place for belonging. And it just kind of sat with me and stayed with me through my teenage years. When we moved again, when I was 13, I went to a new school and made friends really easily, I would say, but still kind of had this thing, like just really willing to do whatever I needed to do to change who I was for the person in front of me, because I really just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. And so that really led me that year at 13 to hang out with a group of people, and went to a party, my first party when I was 13 years old. And at the party, I was coming to the party, and there's a young man there who sees me, shows some interest, which I hadn't had many people interested in me up to that point. Shows some interest, and I'm not really very interested, but he really proceeds to continue to pursue me throughout the night while I'm avoiding him. But by the end of the night, while I was drunk by the end of the night, my first time drinking, and a girl actually she said, "Hey Ashley, come back here and look at this wallpaper in this bedroom." She led me back to this bedroom to look at this wallpaper, and in the bedroom, the guy was waiting for me, and he raped me. And so really that changed my life. What that did for me, especially because at that time, I didn't know that it was rape, and so I really took on a lot of the responsibility for what happened, and I really had very little memory of what happened, and I kind of based my memory on all the rumors that were spread about me. And so how I dealt with that pain was running, like full speed ahead. Really my relationships at home really kind of became either completely silent or really volatile. And when I say volatile, I don't mean abuse. I just mean like word discussions that would seem to be normal or just not normal because we didn't really know how to do that. And I'm experiencing kind of what you guys are talking about, where I've really become like very fight or flight. And for me, I developed an eating disorder around that same time. And while I was doing well in school, I started, making kind of C's and D's around the time in the 8th grade. And so went to some counseling. They're like, okay, you have ADD, all the things that happen. And so kind of become in the position where, okay, now I'm just the bad girl at school. And so go throughout really my teenage years that way, 13, 14, 15, 16, really kind of living the same, just getting worse and worse every year with partying and drinking and running away and staying out at night, and really, definitely putting my parents through a lot and my entire family. But we moved to Florida when I was 16. We moved to Niceville, where I live now. And really during that time, it was like when I moved to Florida, everything sped up real fast. I ran away to New Orleans when I was 16. Thankfully, I was arrested. And for stealing something, I was arrested, and my parents came to get me. And I was sent to a home for girls that really saved my life during that time and enabled me to be able to graduate high school, because I don't know if I would have. So the backstory is important to set you up to like the time when I was about to be an adult when I came home from that program. Really the program, while it saved my life, I did not get a lot of life skills, and there was not a lot of addressing old trauma. And so I still had a lot of things that I was doing to cope with life, because I really had never really learned how to deal with stress either. Dealing with stress for me would put me in, like if I had to deal with it head on, it would probably put me in such a panic that I would have to go and go shopping, go do something to get rid of whatever this kind of panic or stress was. So I really not developed a good gauge on how to deal with anything tough, or even a little bit tough. I'm talking, when I say tough, I mean like an argument, right? Like everything would fly me off the hook. So I come home from this program and really, really intending to do good. I was home 2 weeks exactly, and I get a job during those 2 weeks at a restaurant. I'm 17. Can you tell me? The mic is kind of going in and out. I get a job at a restaurant as a hostess, and now I'm all of a sudden still a teenager, used to moving fast, but now I'm in a very adult world doing it. And so I go get a fake ID and I go out one night. And the first night that I go out, I go home with a bouncer, go home with somebody. And I'm just trying to set this up for about how trusting I was and who I'd be willing to do really anything for. And shortly after that, it just kept going like that. If you know what I'm saying. So I just was finding myself where I worked at the restaurant, but then I partied a lot. I was out at a club probably every night of the week. And that lasted about 2 months. And in those 2 months, I was introduced to a woman through someone that I was a roommate with. I was introduced to a woman who, they basically were like, hey, we got this crazy girl that you need to meet. That's how it was told to me, at least. So, get to a club one night, and they introduced me to her. Her name was Dee. And introduced me to Dee, and Dee takes a real strong liking toward me. She's like, let's go and buy everybody drinks. We'll buy out the bar. So we go, she buys out the bar, and then I kind of like become a little bit of her pet. So Dee starts slowly but surely doing little things. Like, hey, let's go get your nails done. Hey, let's go shopping. Hey, let's go, come over to my house and I'll make you dinner. Come up like little things like that over time. And for me, really partying, and it gets expensive, even though I had a couple of jobs. Like, it still gets expensive and tough to get to work when you're kind of living that fast. So there was a draw for that for me with her. Are you guys hearing me okay? Because I keep hearing your mic a little bit. Okay. Anyways, and so then all of a sudden, then it becomes, hey, let's keep a safe at y'all's house, and we'll start paying your rent. So then now they're starting to pay my rent. And eventually, a guy from they were drug dealers. Okay, Dee was a drug dealer. And, but they had and how it would work is they would have somebody come up from Miami, and the guy from Miami would, drop off and deliver, and then they would give it to all the other drug dealers in the area. It was kind of like that. So she says, hey, come on over. So-and-so's here, going to be here from Miami. Want you guys to party with us, and I want you to meet him. I'm like, okay. So I get to the house, and she introduces me to him, and there's another person with me. And so I meet him, and I really, at that point, I had never really had the thought before, man, I feel like I just met the devil. Like, I had this strong feeling like he was not a good person. I didn't leave or anything, but I had this really strong feeling about him. Anyways, the night goes on, and and she tells my friend that I came with, hey, why don't you go ahead and go? Ashley's going to stay a little bit longer, and we'll just party, and we'll bring her home. And he's like, okay, cool. So he leaves, and I heard somebody mention how the switch happens. So he leaves, and I'm left with Dee and the guy from Miami, and kind of now hear their plan. And basically how it worked, how it kind of happened was really fast. And she said, hey, listen, we've been doing all this for you for all these months. You're never going to sleep with anybody again and not get paid, do you understand? And we're going to teach you what that means tonight. And so that really began for me my first experience of being trafficked. And that actually happened in Niceville. I cannot remember for the life of me the house, but I sell property close to where this is happening. I mean, my son has friends that live on the streets nearby where this happened. It's just a normal community. You would not drive through where this house was and imagine that someone who's selling drugs or trafficking women out of this house. Because for me, my story did not happen in the house. She would take me out on drug runs, ask people what they would give for me, and then kind of that's how it got started in the beginning. I was able to get away from them, which is great news. So how that kind of worked was all of my money I had to bring back to the family. That's what we called it. And I was pretty rebellious even then. Rebelled with my own family and this family, which is dangerous. But so I think I kept like a little bit of money and I bought a purse. And so one day she comes over to the apartment where I was and like yanks me out of bed, beats my face into the ground. And really this was one of a couple of times she had done something like that. And only a couple of weeks before had I kind of fled and told somebody about like, hey, I don't know if I can get away. And they had heard about it, brought me in the was just a little bit about, if you hear when them talk about, if you read about coercion or manipulation, that's a little bit about what my reality looked like during that time. So that morning when that happened, there was some kind of light bulb went off in my head, and she was like, "You have 5 minutes, I'll be out front." So she was out front, and I just remember this light bulb going off in my head because there was a sliding glass back door. And for me, I chose to, at that moment, flee out the back door. And so I was successfully able to get away from them, which saved my life from them for a moment. But unfortunately, what that did for me is it introduced me to a new life. So for me, what that looked like was everywhere that I went, I would be approached by escort agencies, or because they exist here. If you don't know, Pensacola, Florida, Destin, Florida, Santa Rosa Beach, Panama City, they're escort agencies here. And there are women working all the time. And so at that point, I had just become 18 and had some people approach me about working as an escort in Destin. So I worked for a couple of escort agencies for maybe let's say up to 6 months. And at that point, still really reckless, using partying, using drugs, coping, all the things. And during that time, I started coming to Pensacola. There was somewhere here that kept drawing me to Pensacola. And eventually, I moved to Pensacola and lived at a house with a girl here in Pensacola. And honestly, when I think about the two cities, when I compare them, Pensacola was actually a lot darker for me than even it was where I was at the time when I was in Destin. And darker just meaning some of the drugs, some of the people I was around at the time. Went to a club, don't remember which one. And after one night, I'm at a Waffle House with a friend. The friend leaves, and in the back of this Waffle House, there's 5 guys sitting back there. And for some reason, I go and talk to them. And when I go and talk to them, kind of how that is working, we have social media that they talk about, having an insecure person or somebody who's really that thing that they need fed. We have social media that can do it. And this way, they were just more hey girl, what you doing? That kind of thing. And so I went back hey, how are y'all? Because I've been pretty sassy a long time. And so anyway, so I go back there and I talk to them. And they're hey, you should come back to our room. It's just right over here. It's just right behind where we were. And so, for whatever reason, I chose to go with them. And that really introduced me to a whole different level of a different type of trafficking. And basically, went with them back to their room. They gang raped me and woke me up the next day and took me to Atlanta, to Pentney in Atlanta. And that experience was totally different because obviously, nobody tried to gain my trust and approval. It was immediate, rape continually every day. So much so that everywhere that we went, we would go somewhere because, it's a trek from here to Atlanta. By the way, they were also drug dealers. At that time, ecstasy was popular. So they were bringing something like 2,000 ecstasy pills to Pensacola. This was 17 years ago. And so, go with them to Atlanta, and Atlanta was a whole different type of experience for me. Kind of just, what I'm thinking about here is that anytime you hear a trafficking story, they're all going to be really different. And part of the reason why I like to share my story, and I'm open to do it, is it's really important for me, for you to see who I am now as we're looking back at the story. And a lot of the reason for that is when you see someone, if you have no idea, I don't have a picture for me to show you what this woman looked like 17 years ago. She didn't look like how I look now. I can assure you of that. And so I might have missed my own self. You see what I mean? If I would have seen myself on the street, if I would have seen myself at Walmart, if I would have seen myself at the gas station, if I would have seen myself at all the places that you might see me also, I didn't look how I look now. And so my favorite thing about sharing is like really encouraging people for us to like break the way that we see people around us, especially those that we don't know, look like, or can relate to. And I know it's hard, but as you're thinking about this, please think that I'm talking to you as I am now, but this was like a whole different woman that we're talking about, and this 17 years ago. So, anyways, but through a series of events that were extremely miraculous, the people from Pensacola, I'm going to wrap this part up because I want to get into the good stuff. But through a series of events, like the people who take me to Atlanta, they actually had I had a car, and they took over basically ownership of my car. They grabbed my car and everything, but I had the tire blew on the car, and because the tire blew, they just kept the car at the house. And one day, and I'm leaving out an incredible amount of details here, but one day something just rose up on the inside of me, and I decided to get in the car and drive the car with no tire. And so that really is how I was able to get away from them. Called somebody, got a tire, and I never went back to Atlanta. Although they did try to follow me to Pensacola, through many series of events, I finally just did not have anything to do with them. I changed my phone number, everything like that. I really did stay like that. When I got back, I was in such a dark place, like really dark. And when I say dark, I just mean I was like a dead woman walking. And I remember where maybe when I used to go out, maybe I would wear maybe more revealing clothes, but at that point I was like wearing long sleeves. I started when I needed a gas station, I would go out and pay for gas, and panic would come over me to the level of I would have to go to the bathroom. And breathe and hold myself over a sink and put water in my face just to pay for gas. It was and it just was like that. In the morning, I would sleep all day, and I would work at night. I would, but my level at this time of depression and panic was at an all-time high. I didn't even really realize it was, because I was living in it. I only can look back now and remember it. But there was a very special moment for me, and it happened on December 3rd, 2004. And this particular day, I was home, the series of events just got worse and worse, and at that time I was homeless. And when I say homeless, I'm not meaning for me that I was living outside, when I say homeless, mean I never really had anywhere that I actually lived. I would couch surf, I would get a hotel for a night, I would do whatever I needed to do for a place to stay and be able to be who I am now. But that moment is very vivid for me. December 3rd, 2004, I was with someone who was in an abusive relationship, and I just looked at him and said, I need Jesus. And really, I said it really meaning it, and my life I didn't change, but everything about me started changing without me really knowing about it. And about a month later, I found out I was pregnant with my son. And it was really that night when I found out I was pregnant with my son that everything changed for me. I had a very broken relationship with my parents, hadn't spoken to them for a while. And that night I called my mom, and I just said, hey Mom, I'm pregnant. And she kind of had a pause. She said, well, I've been waiting on you to call, and I've been waiting on you to call me with one of three things. One, that you're dead. Two, that you're in jail. Three, you're pregnant. I'm glad you're pregnant. Do you want to come home? And really, my mom's invitation for me to come home, opened up. It was just that small thing that really opened up for me a whole new road for me to be able to have rehabilitation and restoration. It was a very long road. It's been actually a long road. It feels like a short road, but it's been a long road. And I wanted to use that to kind of segue into how important community is. Because at that time, whenever I first came home, I had no I didn't have women like this. I didn't really have anyone but my parents, and my parents at that time, they were willing for me to live with them as long as I would be willing to follow, certain kind of rules. And so I lived with them, and living with my parents, what that did for me is it really enabled me to, we talked about, it enabled me to breathe and rest. And I had some life-changing moments in that time. I was slowly transforming. It's interesting because, there's so many divine moments in it too. Because my dad and I, we had developed a really volatile relationship, meaning we both could be set off really easily. And he was TBY that whole year I was home pregnant, and my mom and I, we really almost couldn't even speak during the day. But I had terrible nightmares every night. Every night, I would wake up and I would sleep with my family dog, my childhood dog would sleep with, he just knew, he'd sleep right beside me, and tuck in real tight, and my little sister would fight for the dog. And, because she's, significantly younger than me. But, anyways, I would wake up from these nightmares, and I hated to be alone. I hated to be in the dark, very afraid of the dark. And I would go into bed with my mom. And it was during that time of just really, even just being in bed with my mom, God, I believe was healing our relationship. So over time, as time progressed, the two of us, we just both softened toward each other. And because of that softening for me, because I really did not want anybody to tell me. I don't know if I would have liked them. I might have. But because anything that kind of reminded me, I don't know, especially about faith, anything about faith, but anything that just reminded me of something that I really didn't want to have anything to do with it. But I did have a transforming moment right before my son was born. And honestly, by the time my son was born, I got into community with a small church in the country that a guy that I had started dating, his family ran. He was in prison. So anyway, but this woman who was a pastor, the woman who pastored the church, I don't really know how to describe it, but I remember walking into the church and imagine, so how I walked in, my son was 2 weeks old, and I literally had nothing that fit. And I had an old, club dress, I'm talking street walking looking dress, that I just put on and put down to my knees and put a jacket on and walked inside. And I just remember this woman, her name is Brenda Blackman, and she's amazing. And I remember when I walked in, something immediately drew me to her. And the way that she treated me, she became basically a mentor to me for the next 4 years of my life during that time. And honestly, my parents were able to provide me a safe and secure place to live, where I didn't really have to worry about money. I didn't really have to worry about a lot of things that make people go back to what they came from. And then God brought me someone was available, I should say. Someone made themselves available to be in a relationship with somebody and not ever bring up how they presented themselves to them at the time. So what I mean is this, I would present a problem to her, and she would be like, no, that's not who you are. This is who you are. I mean, every time I wish I could paint a picture for you to see what that girl looked like all that time ago. I remember, I was thinking about possibly going back to school or going to college, I should say. And I just remember, I didn't really even know that I could learn. And I tried, and since I didn't know how to be a student and it just felt too hard, I really only did it for a short time. And I'm sure people who'd been in my life for a long time were very frustrated, because it's hard. But I just remember just this overwhelming sense of I'm just not very smart. It's hard for me to learn, right? But there was this other voice, another person that was around me that just wouldn't believe, she refused to believe that for me. And she, like I said, she would just tell me who I really was. And it was during that time that I got a couple people took chances on me, I would say, and I got a job. Because I did have a criminal background, I would say. During this course of time, I got a DUI. And also fleeing and eluding and a couple of other things. And this was in Santa Rosa County. But, so during that, so you can see, so someone giving me a job, they would have to see, like, there's a little bit of a chance that someone takes to avoid somebody who has some of the things that I had going on. And my first job, I actually couldn't drive because of the DUI and because of my time period with the traffickers, and I didn't show up to probation and things like that because I was not here. I violated probation and I never paid any tickets, and so I actually didn't have a license for 2 years. I was able to get a hardship license for 5 years after that. So I really wasn't able to drive with a normal license until I was 27. And because that would be that length of time. And so for me at that time, my mom was like, well, I'll drive you to work, and I had a baby too. My mom was like, I'll drive you to work, but I'll drive you within 5 miles. That's what you got. You got 5 miles. And for me in Niceville, the person that paid the most at the time was McDonald's. And so I got a job at McDonald's. And I worked at McDonald's for about 18 months. And it's cool because even my employers in the beginning, and I looked like a mess when I first started there, in the beginning, like every so often, it would be like, well, let's move Ashley here. And then let's move Ashley here. And by the time I left McDonald's, like I did not take it because I chose to get a different type of job, but I actually was offered at some point in my life, that same family offered for me to be an assistant manager at McDonald's. So I'm saying that's a huge leap. That was a lot, possibly some risk in hiring me, but by the end of getting to know me and seeing me, by the end, there was opportunity for me. Because, it's really difficult to take care of a family on that kind of income, but incrementally, you can learn what to do, and people, I think, once given trust, people can surprise us, by being trustworthy, but it takes time, So, anyways, through a course of events, I got another job that I really thrived in, which was in retail. I was in retail for several years, became an assistant manager, and then eventually I decided to go back to school, and really the door opened for me to go to Auburn and kind of carry on a family tradition, and I was able to do that. So my son was starting kindergarten, and I was starting at Auburn, and I actually graduated on his 8th birthday. So it was very special. And we kind of get to the point of me graduating from Auburn, and then I actually worked at Auburn, and have a lot of amazing relationships and opportunity. It's always been really important for me to be teachable, and so most of my life, after having my son and experiencing transformation, and really being willing to learn something. Not always willing to do it, but definitely willing to hear it. But around that time, I was really feeling like I was supposed to move back home. And so I moved back home, and in doing that, I met someone. They talked about the organization that I worked with before, Be Generous. And I met her and started learning about what she does in the community, because our hearts kind of aligned, because I knew, okay, I really want to help women who've been where I've been. And so we get started, and she introduces me to someone that everybody knows. Another survivor of human trafficking in my area, and she introduces me to her. She's like, y'all need to meet, you need to spend time together. And I'm like, okay, great. And I meet her, tell her my story, and at the end of the story, she says, because I've been telling my story a different way than I do today. I meet her and she says, hey, I need you to realize something, like you were victimized by human trafficking. I'm like, nah, I don't believe you. Because I've been hearing about human trafficking for several years, probably about 7 years up to that point, but I had never considered myself as a victim of human trafficking. She says, no, I really think you need to know you were a victim of human trafficking. Here's some resources. You need to go and do this research for yourself. So over the course of the next 6 months, I began to do that research, and in that time period, around the end of that, I actually met Jenna, and I don't remember who she was with, but we somehow through a series of events we met, and I kept being affirmed about, there was something about me learning that not everything that happened, there was something about me learning that not everything that happened was my fault, and really, some healing that I still needed that I didn't know I needed, because even though I was doing well, I mean, I bought my first house, I graduated from school, my son is doing great, but I would find myself doing good for about 5 days, and then I would crash. And then I pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I would do good for a couple days, and then I would crash. And when I mean crash, I just mean like a sea of depression would come over me. And most people probably wouldn't know unless you were close to me. Because I mean, I'm pretty outgoing, so it's not like but there was something about finding out about human trafficking and really then self-identifying and really kind of just letting that be like, oh my gosh, that explains why this could have been hard. That explains why this happened. It just helped to explain for me why different things happened and why I was processing the way I was processing. So really what that did for me is it was able to give me some grace. And eventually I was able to completely just remove any shame or kind of any doubt that surrounded me. And I can successfully say that I have been free from any type of depression or severe mood swings for about 3 years.
Praise the Lord.
So I'm staring back to say that a lot of times when I would start to go to counseling, especially before I knew I was a survivor, which you don't have to call me that when you see me, by the way, sidebar. Because really, I'm just Ashley, right? Because we all have a story. And I've just been asked here today to share the story so that you can maybe have a face. So when you're out and about in your community, you're thinking about what you can do to build relationships to change your community and to change the people in the community. That's why a lot of times when we have events like this, we ask someone to share a real story, because people, you tend to be like yes, and a lot of times people can self-identify. One of my favorite times of sharing my story, I don't know where I'm at on time, but we're good.
No.
We're out of time. Oh my gosh, y'all need to be like, okay, oh my gosh. Well, I'm just going to share the story really quick. And then there's this little quote I want to sing. I'm so sorry, I wish I would have told me. But, oh my gosh, okay. Long-winded. One of the last times I shared in Pensacola was at an 821 event. And I remember sharing, I have no idea how I said it or what I said, but at the end of it, a young girl came up to me. She was probably around 19, and she was just crying. And she said, she was at Teen Challenge, because if you don't know, there's a Teen Challenge here in Pensacola that really has done a lot to change a lot of people's lives. And she runs up to me and she's like, oh my gosh, I so relate to your story. And she's like, I wasn't trafficked, but this happened to me. And essentially what happened to her is a similar story to what we've shared today. And she's from Niceville, because she mentioned that. But essentially her mom was an addict, and her mom had addict friends over at her house. And starting around 12 or 13 years old, her friends introduced her daughter to drugs. And it was free the first couple of times, but then it cost something. And she was just a normal girl going to high school. She graduated high school. Imagine the teachers she had. Imagine the coaches. She played softball. Imagine the number, it really messed me up. I cried the whole way home when I met her. Because I just was like, oh my gosh, how many people saw her? How many people were around her that knew about it? And so the thing to remember is there's a lot of treasure hidden in plain sight. And so I encourage you to be treasure hunters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad has helped start or has been instrumental in the establishment of most of the anti-trafficking initiatives in the Panhandle of Florida. Please join me in welcoming my friend, mentor, and hero, Brad.
So thank you very much. I appreciate it. It is truly an honor to be here, and actually, it's more than an honor. It is really, truly a full circle. I was introduced earlier as a dinosaur, and I really because I started my very first case of human trafficking that I worked was in 2001. And back in those days, no one talked about this issue. No one recognized it for what it was. Now we actually have activists that are actually out there helping. If you saw what was recently put out from Tallahassee PD, you see that law enforcement are creating large-scale task forces to go and try to rescue these women and children out of these situations. And I am very fortunate to be a member of several organizations that are actively involved with that, and each one of those organizations are housed and based right here in Pensacola, made up of volunteers, community members, several actually made up of realtors that are actively involved and engaged in going out there, and several of them are here today, so I'm going to ask them to stand up so y'all can applaud their efforts. So stand up, people. We are that organization, right? We are that organization that if a young Ashley goes missing today from Navarre, Florida, and she finds herself all the way over in New Orleans, there's an organization that's going to do their absolute best to try to locate her, find her, pull her out of that situation, and then introduce her to things like respite care, right? And put her into a safe home like the Secret Place, and then move through that part to be able to go into a full-blown recovery so that we get people out of this term and these terminologies of victim and survivor and move them to a place called conqueror, because that's what you saw here today, is conqueror. I'm going to do this a little different. I was asked to do the keynote, but also show you pictures and all of that stuff, and quite frankly, I think that where we're at today is really getting to a point of what do I do next? I am also a pastor, so anytime you give a microphone to a pastor, you have to know that there's going to be some scripture that's going to come out. I just want you to know that. And so that scripture that I was reminded of, and I was literally sitting back there thinking about all of the times that we heard people step into these young ladies' lives and affect it for the positive, that brought them out of situations that they had found themselves in, that they were trapped in. But it took someone else to be able to step in there and do something about it, to recognize it for what it was. And I'm reminded of a scripture out of Ezekiel 22:30. And essentially what that is all about is that there was a people, a group of people, lived in a community, if you will, a nation, in which evil was always at their doorstep. Evil was always seeping through the gaps in the walls and being able to come in and infiltrate right there in the middle of the night. And when they infiltrate, they were coming after the women and the children and the hearts and the souls and the minds. And the Lord looked and he said, I looked for someone that would be willing to stand in the gap for that. And I found no one. And I believe that we are in that same place today. This is the cause that have brought so many of us together. Social injustice is going to be the mark of this generation. This is only one of those marks of social injustice, but it is a very valid one. It is an important one, and it is one that affects every single community in America. I have been to Atlanta, Georgia. I have been to Fulton Industrial Boulevard. I've been to some of the places that I have no doubt that Ashley remembers and wants to forget. Nasty places. Places that are filled with gaping holes that all of these souls are being sucked right out of. It takes a community willing to stand there and recognize it for what it is and say, you know what? I am going to stand in this gap. Doesn't take much for you to be able to do that. It means that you have to open up your eyes, right? See exactly what is happening right in front of you. I put this up on the screen because it is a very true statement. Realtors. People will say, why are you speaking to realtors? Realtors are one of the very few professions that you may come in contact with a victim still under the control of their traffickers. Why? Because they're out there in your community. I have plenty of pictures that I could show you, but they're out there in your community. One picture of some other community is not going to make a difference. You have to be willing to open up your eyes to what's happening in the communities that you are driving through. Is it barbed wire from a commercial facility that you are going in to take a look at and possibly show, and that barbed wire is pointing in versus pointing out like it should be? Is it when you go through a home, you actually go in and you start to see things like one real estate agent in California did? She went through this home, saw the whole home, went into the garage, and noticed all of a sudden what looked to be like a sleeping place, a sleeping area. Really, really odd in a garage. When she looked closer, what did she find? A bucket of urine. She had a good friend in law enforcement, said, hey, there's some leaky stuff going on in this house. They actually did an investigation and found a young child that had been smuggled in from Africa that was forced to live inside there, and actually was the sex slave for the people that lived there. A realtor stood in the gap that day. It could be that you're going into a house and you're looking into the areas and you're starting to see bars on the inside of windows, and normally aren't those on the outside of windows? Or even worse off, bars on the inside of windows, but they have locks, and they're actually locked there. I know that we heard that a little bit before, but it is very, very real. I did a canine, someone mentioned my canine work, so I was in Washington State doing a canine seminar for law enforcement agencies. They had me work their SWAT house. The house where SWAT goes in has been donated to them, so they go in and make all their entries and all this other stuff, right? And it had just been donated to them. They had never used it before, and they gave it to us to use. Cool. I go set up our problems, and our dogs start working the problems. I go upstairs, and sure enough, as I go up this really tiny staircase, there is a padlock on the outside of this door going into this upstairs room. That's kind of odd, wouldn't you agree? Because that's an upstairs bedroom. I go into that upstairs bedroom, and there is an attic space, a crawl space, and guess what? There's a padlock on that. When you go inside, guess what I found? An old mattress that was laid out inside this attic space. I called the cops and I said, have you guys actually checked this place or what? Because this ain't right. It just takes a moment to actually look at the signs. You also heard the signs of maybe you're going and doing a showing, and across the street or down the corner, there's just all of this traffic coming and going all throughout the entire day. Maybe just that one sign is not enough for you, but take a look at that traffic and take a look at how they feel about you looking at them. Is there a lot of cameras out there outside of that property? Or when you go inside property, are you seeing a lot of cameras internally inside the home, especially in some of the bedroom spots? That's not right. Something's wrong. Sometimes it's something that is really out of the normal that you can do. I did a presentation back in January before the crazy COVID hit. And it was done for our task force over at Olive Baptist Church. And it was a good night, and it was a great time. And actually, I think I was getting over COVID because I was coughing my head off. Some of you remember that one. But as I sat there and I spoke, I had this lady come up to me. And she says, "What do you know about massage parlors?" Told her a little bit about what I knew about massage parlors. And she said, "But do you know about this particular massage parlor over in Gulf Breeze?" And I said, "I do." "Do you know that they just busted it?" I said, "I do." "How do you know that?" "I can't say that." How do I know? But I just know that intel was given to law enforcement, and law enforcement busted it. What did they do? They joined together, banded together, became a group that was willing to stand in the gap. They went and bought that place or got that place given to them that used to be a massage parlor, that used to be a home of human trafficking, that will now become a place of recovery and redemption for every single person that has been victimized in this area. That's what they did. These are those ladies. There's a lot of things that we can do and a lot of things that we can use to affect change in our community. I was asked to make this as a keynote and then asked to give you the indicators. Hopefully I've done at least some of the indicators. And I have no problem sharing more of those indicators, but I also wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for questions. Because to be able to come here and listen to all this, and I'm going to tell you that this is probably out of all of the years that I've been doing this, this is by far, the best little seminar that I have ever been a part of. Because what you heard today was these young women that came up here, and they absolutely, I can call you young, by the way. I know, say all this right here. These young women came up here, and what you heard was truth. You heard reality. Reality hits you in the gut. Reality says, "Oh my gosh, really, that happened? Why are you talking about that?" If you want to be able to make a change in today's society, you've got to hear it real. You've got to hear it raw. It cannot be filtered. We have spent a lifetime filtering everything from our children and from our families, that now all of a sudden our children are walking out into a world that they really do not know anything about. How do I know? Well, guess what? This year along with COVID-19, our organization has reached 96% increase in the cases that we have taken in. Kids are no longer in school and they're out home and they're online and they're communicating. Many of the cases that you now read about, literally today, if you're reading the newspaper today, are cases that our team has worked with. Cases in which young kids are being lured and groomed away from their home online and then find themselves victimized. Out of all of that 96% of the cases, 73% of those cases resulted in a child being sexually molested or abused after they ran away. See, the world is a dangerous place for our children. They are. It is. We have to do a better job at policing ourselves and policing our communities. You are on the front line, whether you like it or not. You signed up and have joined the Army, and you are on the front line. Why? Because you are out there driving this community every single day. And these things are happening right in front of your eyes. It is. It doesn't stop. Now it's up to us to wake up and recognize that they're happening and then begin to share that information. How do I share that information? Well, first and foremost, you were told that you are a mandatory reporter. I love it when they said that. Because you are. You are. Friends, we are our brother's keeper. And it's time that we actually step up to that role. So if you believe that a child is being somehow engaged, forced into some form of trafficking, commercial sexual trafficking, sex abuse. A trafficking victim that is of sexual orientation is any child that's under the age of 18 that is involved or engaged in any commercial sex act. What that means is pornography, sexting pictures back and forth, stripping and escort dancing, to full-blown intercourse. And something of value was traded for them. That, my friend, is sex trafficking, and that child is a victim. That child cannot consent to that. I don't care what your consent laws are. That's not Brad's way of saying it. That's the federal law. That's the state law. If they are under the age of 18 and a commercial sex act was engaged for something of value, that value can be anything. It can be that iPhone, because I really want that iPhone. It could be that blunt. It could be that couch to sleep on, right? Or it could be money. Whatever it is, that child is a victim. Period. If I recruit, if I harbor, if I go and grab and kidnap, which doesn't happen very often, by the way, because it's so much easier just to manipulate people than it is for me to kidnap someone. But if I recruit, if I harbor, if I then exploit them for any type of purpose whatsoever, sexual and or labor, and I have used force, fraud, or coercion, then that person is a victim. Kind of makes sense? In this area, we have worked cases since 2001. So we have seen it all. In beautiful little Gulf Coast, we have seen it all. I am so happy to hear today that our sheriff says, I will take this serious. Because I cannot tell you how long we have been fighting an uphill battle. What I will tell you is I have seen trafficking in this area at our shipyards over in Panama City. I have seen trafficking at our restaurants. I have seen trafficking at our hotels out in Gulf Shores and as well as over in Gulf Breeze. I have seen trafficking of Eastern European women that have been flown into this country under J-1 work visas, all up and down Panama City and all over in Gulf Shores in Alabama. This is rampant. When we started this back in 2001, we averaged 24 million. That's what the State Department came out. I don't know how they averaged that. You don't walk around in the community and say, hey, by the way, if you're a slave today, raise your hand. But they came up with an average, 24 million. 4 years later, we came up with a brand spanking new reauthorization from Congress and said this is also happening to our American citizens. And at that point, they said we're at 27 million men, women, and children that are somehow caught into captivity and slavery, this thing called human trafficking. Today, after all of those years of us fighting it, this is 20 years of fighting this. 2000 was when we finally named this thing human trafficking. 20 years, and we're at 40.3 million men, women, and children caught up in slavery. Number 2 criminal enterprise in the world. State of Florida routinely ranks in our country either second or third in our country for the rate of human trafficking. This is happening in your backyard. It's happening in this community. The worst case that I have had, okay, I take that back. Not the worst case that I've had. The youngest case that I've had, let me put it that way, occurred less than 2 miles from where we are sitting right now. Less than 2 miles. A young little 8-year-old that was forced every single Friday night to go and strip in front of these 5 migrant workers in her little community. Strip, naked, for 20 bucks, so mom could pay her drug habit. Mom then took her 14-year-old over to have sex with those men every single night. This happened in front of the community. This happened for over a year before it was ever brought up. This happened in front of people's eyes. People saw this take place, had to have known this is what was occurring, and remained silent. Evil only exists as long as good people do nothing. So we have a mandate upon us. And that mandate is very simple. Stand in the gap. Be their voice. What you heard is people, young people that had their voice ripped completely away from them. They didn't know who to turn to. I love that even today, you still hear out of some of the testimony, guilt and shame, and I did this and I did that. No, all of that was taken away from you. But most importantly, what was taken away from you was a voice. In our community today, we have men, women, and children that have no voice. I'll also stand up here, and I'm going to close so we can have questions. But I also stand up here representing two factions. Two factions. You're the only guy that's up here in this whole group. But that's the only guy. I represent a minority of victims that never get spoken about in this country. That needs to be spoken about. Because they too are being victimized. Our team just witnessed that. And it became a reality for them in a case that they had recently taken. But the other side to that was alluded to earlier, is that as a male, as a man, as a guy, as a dude, I represent the demand in this entire industry. You see, people always say, in our age, we're going to stop this. No, you're not. I'll just speak truth. I know nothing else to speak but that. No, you won't. This will not stop until men hold each other accountable. Until men grow some cojones and hold each other accountable. It's our need, it's our desire, it's our demand for more sex, more prostitution, more pornography that drives this entire industry. And until we are willing to recognize that and start to truly understand how to relate to women and stop treating them as nothing more than sexual objects, this will continue to happen. That's just the truth. Take it from someone that has been a part of rescues and as well as arrest. Take it to someone that is a pretty hot, sexy 14-year-old female online. Just let you know. That's what you're looking at. Just saying, pretty hot, sexy 14-year-old female. You should hear the things that men say. Grown men. Men that had told me about their children. Men that had told me about their wives. Men. So there's a lot of work that we have in front of us. There's work that we have just levied upon you as realtors that you can go out and stand in the gap while you are out there in our community. There are signs that we have given you. There's more signs that we have shared with you. Please grab one of those sheets that we gave you. Yes, that's just the beginning of it. But I also understood from Sarah that we only want this to be the beginning of it. We want this to be enough to whet your appetite that either your brokerages or your association wants to bring us back to actually do a much more in-depth training. We're happy to do that. But at the same time, we as humans have to also take a look at some things ourselves. Part of that is as you sat in here, especially as a young woman or as a young man, maybe some of this triggered some past for you. That's the reality. And if that has occurred, then I hope and pray that you get the help that you need to be able to work through those things, because that's still a victimization that is in your life that is still hurting, is still raw. And a presentation like what we've just had today has a habit of ripping that Band-Aid off. And so you need to be able to understand that, recognize that for what that is, and understand that there is people up here that is more than willing to wade through that with you and get you the help that you need. Absolutely. I'm going to allow Sarah to open this up for questions in just a minute, but I do want to end with a story because we've had a lot of stories today. And it's the only way that I believe that this becomes something that sticks in people's minds. I normally tell stories through the pictures, but today I really liked this approach. The story is of that one group that I represent up here, of those boys or those men that also get abused in this industry, that don't get talked about a lot. So I want to share with you about my cases. I call it my case. It is one of my cases. It was probably my first case, if I'm honest with myself. It was a case of a young 9-year-old boy. Lived with a mother and a father, right? Mom was a workaholic, dad was an alcoholic. Mom worked all the time because she didn't want to come home and get beat by dad. Dad stayed gone all the time drinking because he didn't want to be home with mom. That left the 9-year-old all by themselves all the time. This 9-year-old finally found themselves in the company of their 21-year-old cousin. Mom and dad decided that they were going to fix someone. They loved projects, and so this became the next pet project. The 21-year-old cousin was a drug addict, could not hold down a job, and was pretty much a deadbeat. Let's bring him into the house. We'll give him responsibility. It's during the summer, so we'll put him in charge of the 9-year-old. Pretty sure you can recognize where this is going. It was not long before the 21-year-old was having fun with the 9-year-old and showing the 9-year-old pornography, and got started with pornography, and then that became an every single day thing until molestation started. From molestation, it just went straight on into true enough sexual abuse. As the cousin would begin to do more and more drugs, especially with some of his friends would come over, and that was just like a party favor. That went on for a couple of years because, like we said, when you are stuck in the middle of this, you can't look around and see anyone willing to stand in the gap. All you see is gaps. And the one thing that you know is who do you turn to? After all, you can't, for this poor guy, you cannot turn to your mother and father because they're the ones that brought this monster into your life. So who do you turn to? Who is going to be your voice? And I will tell you, the first time that someone steps into your life and provides you a voice, let me tell you, you'll never forget that person. Am I right? So for this young boy, that voice came in the form of a nurse. Craziest way that it happened. The young boy loved baseball. Dad took him to get his baseball physical at the health department. Now, if you know anything about that, and if any of you grew up that way and having to go and get your physicals, you know they're not taking your clothes off. They're not doing all that stuff. It is, let's check your heart and make sure that you got a beat, right? All right, cool. You got a heartbeat. I guess you're good to go play sports now, right? But this nurse saw something. There's indicators in all this health department, and wore those stories all over his face. And this nurse recognized it right from the very beginning. Asked the father to step out, came in, sat down, and says, I'm not here to do an exam. I'm here to find out what's going on. You're in a safe place. You can talk. For the first time in 2 years of that abuse, I finally had someone that gave me a voice. I finally had someone that was willing to actually listen to my side of the story. Because up until that point, all I could ever think of is how my dad was going to hate me. My dad was the biggest homophobic that you could ever imagine, so I could only imagine how his reaction was going to be if he ever heard that the man that he brought into my house was doing this to his son. But that woman changed my life. That woman gave me a voice to the point that I can now have enough guts to stand up and say what was actually occurring. Oh, I paid some prices for that, but that's a totally different story. But the best part of the story is that she recognized something and helped me have a voice. She stood in the gap for me. This whole call to action today is about you recognizing that you have an opportunity to stand in the gap for others. They're out there. I'm telling you, they are out there. You just have to open up your eyes to see it and then have the guts to report it. How do I report it? I apologize. I started going there and I went away. So, if it is a child, then the mandatory report call for you to make is 1-800-96-ABUSE. 1-800-96-ABUSE. Is it on there?
It is on the bottom.
Ooh, look at y'all people. Ooh, look at y'all. And then 1-888-3737-888 is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. If you call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, they will immediately patch your call over to local law enforcement, or if they believe it is serious enough, they will go directly to the FBI. They will also alert the local service providers in that area to make sure that services are being readied for any potential victims. If you notify 1-800-96-ABUSE because it is a child, the thing that I'm going to ask you, when you make that phone call, you can't stay anonymous, all that stuff is fine, but tell them, make sure you tell them you believe it is human trafficking. Because then that kicks a whole different maltreatment code in their system and ensures that who is going to come out and do those interviews is a specially trained child protective investigator. Cool? So you now have the tools in your hands. Sarah, my dear, my job is done.
Questions?
You want them up?
Yes. Terry, how much time do we have for questions?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Brett. If all the speakers could come up and let's go over here. I think Alicia has to slip away. Does anybody have any questions for any of the speakers?
What's the little girl in her motel?
Oh. So, thank you. The little girl in my little pal is Polly Class. She's who our organization is named after. Polly Class was a little 12-year-old that was having a slumber party with two of her best friends in Petaluma, California, October 1st of 1993, when a man broke into the house, tied up the two girls, and took her away. He then later murdered her. I ran the search for Polly, became very invested with their family's life, and so our organization that's based here is named after her. So thank you.
Anybody else? Questions? Yes.
For you and Sir, we have some nurses here. What was it, do you know what it was that the nurse recognized?
It'll be, I can say it, you can stay out there. I have a loud voice. We can reach! It is one of the things that you should be looking for. If a victim is in the company of their trafficker, in the company of a overbearing adult, I mean, we can see this all the time, right? You will see a demeanor change about that child. That child will constantly be looking down. There is no self-esteem in that child. There's no self-confidence in that. I mean, all of those things. And when I walked in, she told me later on, I mean, I had a chance to go back and meet her many years later, and she told me for the first time that I walked in the room, my head was down, I was making eye contact with no one. When she would speak to me, I was making no eye contact whatsoever. She knew then, right then and there, that I was an abuse victim.
Any other questions?
Unfortunately, I still have that.
I would like to ask Joan, how does somebody get involved with your organization?
Well, thank you for that question. You don't have to, can y'all hear me? I think my voice projects well. In the back, I have all my information about Guardian Ad Litem with my name and number on there. Over 21, that's got everybody, clean criminal background, most of your realtors, I know you go through that, and a Heart for Children, a 1-year commitment. So we do all the training, and then we'll partner you up with an attorney and so.
And then, so, you are working within the
Dependency.
child services?
It's called dependency, and
the court?
that's where children come into court because they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected. So all of our children fall under that dependency category, and our job is to go out and visit that child on a monthly basis. After that initial visit's done virtually, whatever that looks like, we do Zooms with all the family, siblings, and stuff. It's really, the kids enjoy it, but we do miss one-on-one contact. First visit's always with the child, though. But yeah, we do all the training online now. It's an easy, relatively easy way to get involved with these children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I do have one.
Go for it.
Janet, what does NISSI stand for?
I would love for Sarah with the mic to tell everybody.
Oh,
So I will say this. So we are in the middle of rebranding, and we, like Jen said, have just updated our mission statement to be that bridge, that gap in between the rescue and the restoration. So Nisi is, that term actually comes from the Bible in Exodus. Jehovah Nisi, the Lord is our banner. So when the Israelites were going into battle, they held up the Lord as their banner to fight for them, as they were the arms and legs of that fight. So that's pretty
So let's just say, some of the stories, and so a child is in a bad scenario with the family. Do they, you guys take the child in and work with them and get them confident again? Do you guys work with the family if they're dysfunctional? Does they come and take the kids out of the family, or do they work with the parents?
Yeah, I'll address that. So what happens is, when you call that 1-800-96 abuse line, an investigator will go out to the house. At that point, they, with a team on the phone, decide whether those children will be immediately removed. If they are, they come in Escambia County to our office, which is the Juvenile Justice Courthouse. They go before the judge. The judge will then, what's called a shelter hearing, the children are removed. And at the next hearing, the parents get a family plan. So the children are removed, and then the families, through DCF and Families First here locally, that's just for Escambia County, will get a family plan that they are working on, whether that's they go to drug treatment, go to domestic violence classes, go to parenting classes, whatever that looks like, and then work on reunification. Our goal is always reunification, unless it's egregious crimes, but we all work for unifying those children. Children work best in families, and the state is recorded, the state is not a good family. So yes, we are all fighting for these children to go home. If that's not a safe thing, then we need foster and adoptive families. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. And I think Terry's going to come up with a few words, but thank you all for being here today and making it a time. Well, I received a program today. The program in the back has the numbers. I ask that you take this home with you, put it in your Bible, so if you ever need it, you know exactly where it is. I'm also going to ask you not to leave here today without making a commitment to combat this evil. Your prayers, your time, and your money are much needed. We have been told that we're on the front line, we're the army, and we need to help fight for the people that can't fight. Praise the Lord that we're not in one of these situations, and that when we were, we got out of them. And that's what we're here for, to learn as much and to spread the word of what's going on. We have baskets back there if you'd like to donate. There's also, on the back, it says text the word DC to 4111. So please, please, give of your time, give of your money, and definitely give